Please listen carefully.
Well, hello, universe, and welcome to the Optimist Daily Update. I'm Kristy Jansen.
And I'm Summers McKay.
And we're part of the team behind the Optimist Daily, making solutions the news. We bring you reader-funded solutions news every day in order to change the tenor of news media, social media, and the direction of your day to help make it one focused on solutions.
7 days a week, we publish positive news stories written by award-winning journalists and delivered online to your inbox and through our social channels. And also, we are sharing these solutions in a commute-worthy, walk-worthy, home office-worthy, gardening on your 3-day weekend-worthy podcast. Today is Monday, the 31st of May, 2021.
3-day
Hello,
weekend?
Kristy. I know.
What's that? I don't remember those.
So 3-day weekends are these days that happen for lots of people, but not necessarily people in the news media.
It's funny because since we've been working from home also, I don't even know if I have a 1-day weekend anymore.
Yes.
And the boundaries have just
Your boundaries have been just permanently blurred. So my weekend is no surprise to everyone. My weekends are usually measured by like the efficacy of childcare. And so then whether or not she's, got, what was it that your friend called it? Recruit crud or something, right?
Boot camp croup. He is from the military, and I guess that's what they call it, because when the guys come in or the people come in from all over the country, they are exposed to all new bugs, so everybody gets sick the first week of boot camp.
Right. Well, and an appropriate sort of reference for Memorial Day, no less. But anyway, so childcare marks whether or not it's the weekend or not. And this morning was kind of a bit of a scramble. My husband does happen to actually be in town right now, which is amazing. So he is taking the baby for a few hours so that we can get some work done. But we did send everyone in our office. We told them this afternoon, we're making it a lighter day at the Optimist Daily as far as work goes,
but
because
the news
we all
never
need a
sleeps.
break.
The news never sleeps. Solutions never go away. So
yes,
there's always more good things to talk about.
Exactly. The news never sleeps, but perhaps it should. And solutions can percolate with good days of rest and barbecues and splashing in, a hose water or a pool.
Yeah. And so today we're not talking about our solutions because
solutions are percolating today. Instead,
yes.
Instead, what are we doing, Kristy?
We have a really great guest, and I'm really thrilled. And I've been wanting to do this interview for a while, but it worked out to be today. Today we have Olivia Knight on, who's the Racial Justice Initiative Manager of a really fantastic organization called As You Sow, which is a nonprofit leader in shareholder advocacy. For some reason, I can never say that word properly, which has been around since the 90s, and they focus on harnessing shareholder power to create lasting change that benefits people, planet, and profit. And Olivia Knight joined their team recently to help them move forward on their racial justice initiatives. So what they do is they research corporate actions on racial justice, and they create database scorecards. And then those scorecards can serve as an evaluation tool to motivate the companies to end their complicit relationship with systemic racism. And we'll hear a lot more about that once we bring Olivia on.
Real quickly, Kristy, before we welcome Olivia, you have been tracking the As You Sow organization for quite some time. We can explore it with Olivia, but on a personal level, why are you so passionate about this organization and these people? Because it really seems to strike a chord with you.
It does. Well, I mean, I don't know if our listeners realize this, but I'm also the executive director of the World Business Academy, which also is engaged with encouraging business to be a positive social partner. But As You Sow is an organization that we have a lot of commonality with. And in fact, they are also invoking the pause grantees. So we share a grant parent, which is how I know them also. Yes. And then they've been doing tremendous work on promoting environmental change. Just recently working with shareholder activism. We're working with corporate boards and corporate leadership. I think As You Sow does that too. Anyway, we're in a similar space, a similar nonprofit space.
Yep. So, all in the solution focus.
Yes. And I'm working on a bigger story about As You Sow because I want to share a lot of what they've been working on with our readers, which will come out in a couple weeks in the Optimist View. But in the meantime, we get to talk to Olivia, who's a dynamic, exciting person to have on the podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Olivia, and how you came into the As You Sow family.
Absolutely. So I'm a Bay Area native, and so As You Sow has always been in my vision. I'm very passionate about environmentalism and social justice, and so I did my undergrad at Pitzer College with a major in environmental analysis and Black studies. And then I worked for a few years in healthcare and assuring quality healthcare across the Bay Area for children with autism. And a lot of that work did focus on social justice because I was really exploring the discrepancies between who gets care and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. And after working in that space for a few years, which was pretty exhausting, I decided to take a step back and get my master's abroad at the University of Sussex in Brighton, England, in environment development and policy. And so it was a way for me to not only incorporate the work that I've been doing in the healthcare sector and the more corporate side, but also in environmentalism and getting back to those roots.
Yeah.
So
the thing that I think what you're touching on is something we talk about all the time, is that like problems are not siloed and neither are solutions, right? Everything is interconnected. So when you're talking about healthcare, there's a social justice, racial justice component in there. You talk about environmentalism, there's definitely an economic justice and a social justice component in there. You can't separate out these different areas. The messy stuff doesn't happen in one category.
Yes, exactly. And that's always been the focus of my research, is the innards of environmental analysis and environmental justice, environmental racism, looking at post-colonial Africa. My dad's from Ghana, and so it's always been an ongoing topic that I revisit, to what's it like to be Black in America, and how does it feel being one of the only people of color in your environmental science class, and how that goes into then trying to make a career of this. So after finishing graduate school, I fortunately moved back to the Bay right before COVID hit, which was a relief. I can't imagine trying to move my life back from another country in the midst of COVID. But Andy and I connected on my dissertation, which was the lack of African American participation in mainstream environmental movements, which really explored how environmentalism in America was constructed as a whites-only space, and how that's had lasting effects on not only environmental education from a young age, but also in the workplace and getting a job as a graduate.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about at the Optimist Daily that environmental justice and social justice are very much aligned, because so many environmental issues that impact communities of color that just don't even get talked about, right? And it's such a missed opportunity to not align the organizations and the movements together. We've explored that a little bit on the Optimist Daily about knowing that social justice, that environmental justice really can be a social justice mission as well. And I think what you're saying is so, Kristy, that hit me, right, was that the idea that environmentalism has really been constructed largely as a whites-only space. It resonates. It's so true.
And this is why diversity and inclusion in this space, as well as in many others, is so essential for getting beyond our myopic attention to saving one aspect of our environmental experience, right? Olivia, and this is an interesting year. I mean, you came in looking at African American or Black participation in environmental movements in the United States. That was your background. Mm-hmm. And you've also got experience in healthcare and medical. I feel like all of your background, it's like we're in this pressure cooker this year with COVID, which is dealing with the medical industry, and a pandemic, which is social health, public health. And then we get the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning, which was inspired from that. And then we have climate change, which is also barreling down upon us, right? Yeah. So your unique perspective on this is essential. So tell us about how then you came into As You Sow, and what are you working on with As You Sow right now? What's the initiative? I think the racial justice scorecard is your baby right now.
Yes, it is.
But why don't you tell us about that conversation and what your program is and what are the goals? What are you working on?
Absolutely. So Andy and I connected, and we saw such an overlap between what we both wanted to do. He had just seen the murder of George Floyd, and he was shocked, as were all Americans. And he wanted to start building out As You Sow's social programs. So we already have a few. We have CEO pay, we have workplace equity, we have slavery and supply chains. But as you guys were just saying, there is a gap. You have to look at the racial component to all environmental and social issues. And so forming the Racial Justice Initiative was really As You Sow's way of acknowledging that and getting that critical lens into their work. So I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to join the team as the leader of that brand new initiative, which was very interesting because we were charting a course that As You Sow had not done yet. So we created a fantastic advisory council and really just hit the ground running, started reviewing these corporate statements that were coming in and forming some key performance indicators, KPIs, which looked at the exact language that companies use to talk about racial justice, and then realizing very quickly that if a company has a good PR department, they're going to have a better statement than one that doesn't. And so you need to follow that up and look at corporate actions, what they're disclosing, what kind of community engagement they're doing.
And what are they actually proposing to change? It's one thing to say you're going to do good stuff, but what are you actually going to do? And how do you hold them accountable? Next year or 3 years from now. And it's only been a year since this initiative started. So I don't know if you've seen much movement, or tell us about what you've seen over this past year.
It's been a very exciting year because there has been so much movement, because there's been so much pressure from all stakeholders on these companies to really stay true to those promises that they made last summer. And so we're seeing a lot of large companies that have stakeholders' eyes, a lot of shareholder interventions. They are making concrete changes. They're following up on those promises that they made last summer. They're setting future dates. They're hitting milestones. And it's been exciting to watch. I know I've been talking to more and more companies as the scorecard gets promoted around town, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the response has been very positive. Companies know that this is not an issue that's going to go away, that they are incorporating DEI into their business framework. And not only that, but they're taking it one step extra, and they're really asking the hard questions about how do we incorporate an anti-racist lens into our business practice and into our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question to be asking for each of these companies. On As You Sow, you guys rate every corporation, or you rate where you can invest. So like I've gone through and made sure that where my 401k is invested gets like A's on all the environmental markers that you guys do. You have these like, what do you call them?
You have your top 10 and your bottom 10, right? And then you've got everybody in between. Well, and you actually large numbers.
Different funds, which are available in my, 401k Charles Schwab account. I can choose where to put my money. And the thing that I found that was interesting was a lot of the companies that are getting A's on like deforestation and on environmental markers are not necessarily getting A's on gender or other equity issues, or on prisons, for example, which is another area that you guys are rating. I don't know if you have a racial justice marker yet.
We are currently looking at building that out. So When I came on board last year, our workplace equity program led by Meredith Benton had been in place for just over 2 years, I believe. And she created her scorecard building on the S&P 250, and we've been releasing ours every 6 months or so. So we had our last update in March, in which we released the S&P 500, and we are shooting for the Russell 1000, hopefully by the end of the summer, if not by the end of the year. And then after that, once we have that full broad data set on both workplace equity and the racial justice, we will look to incorporate it into the Invest Your Values tool, which I believe is the one that you're speaking about.
Yeah.
Yes, it's fantastic. It's such a wonderful snapshot of really what companies are doing across ESG sectors. And so the next step is absolutely to get those social issues incorporated in that.
Yeah. And I mean, we do a lot of advocacy for stakeholder capitalism. This is with the World Business Academy and also with Just Capital, which I know you work with Yusuf George. I know he's on your racial justice advisory panel.
Yes, he is. He's wonderful.
Yeah. That's a project that the Academy has been involved with since its inception too. So I think it's so interesting to think about how you're helping investors, even small investors, vote with their investment dollars in serious ways. I don't know if you have any way of talking about what just happened with Exxon and the shareholder activism there, which is really starting to turn the needle on even that massive company and where they're going to put their dollars.
Yes, the Exxon vote was so exciting. We were thrilled internally. It's been a passion project for our CEO, Andrew Behar, for years to try and change the Exxon board and to make real concrete change and push that company towards a more ESG focused goal. I know that they did not do very well on our racial justice scorecard. So in the future, we will absolutely be reaching out to them to see how they're doing better on these social justice issues. But the sign that happened yesterday is very promising. And I think moving forward, if we can see that kind of change across traditionally bad actor sectors, then we can really have some great hope for the future.
I think this is so exciting, and for the audience who's listening who maybe works for these organizations or invests in these organizations, this is all really empowering and exciting to see. I know that, like, bringing it back to family and home, I know that the high school that my daughter previously attended set up a DEI committee and had a bunch of meetings, and she was on the committee, and at the end of the year she's like, and they did nothing. And what I would love, Olivia, to get from you is maybe advice for young activists, for people in organizations or companies who maybe participated in, because there was this huge watershed of discussion. And then, as you said, a great PR campaign's one gig, but following up is another. What advice would you have for people who want to see these changes come to fruition?
I would say continue educating yourself and those around you. Really stay motivated to keep on the track to end systemic racism, because without that motivation, education, and knowledge, we can't make real change. And without pressuring these companies, our local officials, governments to make that change, that's how we're going to do it. We need pressure, we need activation, we need to get people aware and engaged.
Yeah, and I think it's going to take time, but you have to keep that pressure on. I mean, how long have we been trying to get oil companies to admit that there is such a thing as human-caused climate change?
Right.
Even though they've known about it for 35 years or however long they've known about it. I mean, they intentionally.
And we've talked, Kristy and I have talked about this. I think one of the writers that I follow has talked about this. Is like, what if all the PR campaigns that have gone to mask these problems were so effective and so ubiquitous and so pervasive, and we have to sort of take a stand in being as effective. And I love what you just said about keep educating yourself and educating others. We actually had a question come in from an audience member about why in the Optimist Daily and in a lot of publications, the racial group Black was capitalized, but the color white when referring to people was not. And we had to take a step back and actually have a discussion about the fact that publications choose to do that, not because there is a color, but because there's a cultural identity. And I think even just educating people on why that exists becomes something important, because it's just these tiny things that those of us who are in the know, it just makes sense. Of course, that's why you do it. But educating people who might not and reaching out to people who might not understand is really the next level of ushering in this change.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. It's been an awakening of a year for a lot of people who didn't have to come into daily contact with these issues.
Yeah.
And perhaps they wanted to learn before, but they just never had that motivation. But now there's so many resources out there. Everyone is building racial equity toolkits. There are so many more opportunities to become informed.
Yeah. And are you offering tools to the corporations that you're putting the pressure on? I mean, even by creating a scorecard, now they have a way to rate their own success. I think, the DEI groups haven't necessarily been integrated to the overall corporate goals in a lot of cases.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that As You Sow we haven't built a toolkit per se, but we do encourage our companies to understand our key performance indicators very thoroughly and then go into an explanation of each of them. So exactly what we're looking for and why. And then we've been able to direct them to our partner organizations like USCIF, who have built a tremendous toolkit with an abundance of resources for both internal and external business practices, both your home life and your professional life. So it's really, there's a lot of stuff out there that people can reference.
Yeah, interesting. So, and how do you feel about this like right now? Do you feel like there's energy that's continuing? I mean, now we're starting to open up. So we've been in this kind of pause and reimagining period. And that's right when you came back from being abroad and, and so now I feel like we're just beginning to come out of our shells. We're learning how to exist in social relationships face to face again. And I mean, a lot of companies have their workforces were remote. They're bringing that back in. What is that going to look like in the future? Who's going to be working? I mean, I think there's this period of renewal and resurgence, and this is exactly the time to implement some of these changes. Like, so what are you seeing or feeling, and how do you think it's going?
It's been interesting. Across the companies that I've talked to in the past few months, depending on where they are in the country, they either already have their workforce back in the office or they're right now trying to figure out exactly how to get everyone back. But they've been saying that this year has been good for their workforce, especially with all the social justice elements that have been happening, because people have a little bit more time in their daily lives to maybe pick up that book on anti-racism or listen to that podcast of Black voices, and watch those movies with their families, that focus on Black stories. So it's been a good time for people to take a step back who work in these large-scale S&P 500 companies and really understand exactly where the other half is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's fascinating to think about, the fact that this pause, as we all say, has really given people a chance to acknowledge things that they didn't, see the unseen. And a lot of what was talked about with regards to the past administration and George Floyd's murder is that it shone a very bright light on the things that we did not discuss, right? The undiscussed, the unacknowledged, and knowing the amount of disagreeing opinions or experiences, and actually being able to say, no, like, this is real. This is not just something that, is a chapter in a book. I was listening to an interview with, I guess there was a professor who was up for tenure, and her tenure was held back because she was focused on the history of America as seen through a slavery lens. And I guess from what I understand, the board of this university were heavily lobbied by people who did not want her to receive tenure simply because her focus was on this thing that nobody previously was willing to talk about. And it's really kind of amazing because then that was picked up by mainstream media who are like, wait a minute, hang on, look, it is systemic. This has to change.
Yes, absolutely. I know internally I received that article from Andy, who was absolutely outraged that had happened. And she's someone that we want to reach out to. I would love to know more of her story.
Yeah. It's so nice to be able to have conversations that we previously were too uncomfortable to have. And if there are good things that came from this pandemic, I think it is the fact that we all got sent home to think about what we'd done.
But
or have it done, right? Because it's not enough to just not do something. And that's the sort of the evolution of seeking out what does it mean to be anti-racist. You can't just be, non-racist, right? You have to realize that this is a infrastructure, a non-physical infrastructure that our entire country was built upon. And so we have to dismantle it from the bottom up. And it's really going to take a lot of work.
Olivia, we don't have time for very many more questions, but do you want to just quickly define just quickly define this very complicated thing, but could you explore what anti-racism means for our listeners before we hit you with our final question?
Absolutely. Well, I would recommend anyone that is curious about it, absolutely read the book, read all the literature that's come out during this year and before on anti-racism and building that framework. But at As You Sow, we approach anti-racism in our conversations with companies as not only here and now being anti-racist and saying that you're not a racist, but actually looking at the full scope of your life and practicing it daily, almost like meditation. It is something that you need to think about. You need to rework everything in your life, every structure that you're a part of, and think how that could be detrimental to someone else and how you may benefit from it. And by breaking down those constructs, you can fully achieve understanding on what racial inequality in America is. And then you can take that one step further to actively practicing anti-racism daily by lifting up voices that have often been marginalized and by continuing that fight.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And I think that really enlightens people on what they can do to participate and to really participate in anti-racism.
The only metaphor that I can see, and I know we have to leave this soon, is just how much work it's taken for us who are in the environmental sector to start to move the needle on the power brokers, the people who are really in power in our country, to start, get them to realize that they have to take this seriously. And we just take it for granted. Things we take for granted, just because it is doesn't mean it should be, right? Mm-hmm. And just because we've built our whole economy on fossil fuels doesn't mean that's right, and doesn't mean that it's not worth dismantling that infrastructure. And this is a social infrastructure which we're actively now starting to acknowledge is there, and we have to slowly unravel it. And it's going to take work and time and lots of uncomfortable conversations, perhaps, or uncomfortable acknowledgments of how, as a white woman, I have different advantages that my Black friends haven't had. Mm-hmm. Or even my husband who's from Mexico, he gets those little microaggressions, which we don't even realize. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the social, the structural racism, which is just built into our companies and our health system and all of that. And it's going to take a lot of work to unravel it. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm preaching, but
you're not.
No, you're right. You're right. Everything fits in, even microaggressions fitting into the larger systemic racism. It is all something that we've been taught to accept and ignore, and we can't do that anymore.
Well, anyway. Yeah. Well, ladies, as you both know, and Olivia, we gave you a little primer on this. Let's ask our final question for the Optimist Daily, because we are all about solutions and positive direction. So what gives you optimism in today's world?
That's a great question. I'm very optimistic that this is still a topic of conversation 1 year later. A lot of people, especially a lot of people of color, were very hesitant after George Floyd's murder last year and then the wave of corporate statements, because they've seen this before. They've seen public outcry of violence, and issues have passed. White America has just said, all right, get on with it. Let's move on. But this has really stuck, and it's really creating lasting, concrete change in some of the largest companies in America, and also in government policy, state and local policies. So I'm very excited and I'm very optimistic that this is really going to stick this time, and that we're going to see some real movement towards anti-racist policies in America.
Yeah, hopefully it's not just a moment, but an actual movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and that is what we all have to focus on and believe and come together collectively to make happen, right? That is why we are solutions journalists. That's why you do what you do, because we have to come collectively together to chart a better path for tomorrow. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for listening to today's Optimist Daily Update. Olivia, thank you for joining us for an enlightening and exciting conversation. We promise to continue to share positive solution-based stories with ideas on how you can participate in this changing world and ensure it is changed for the good. We promise to cover the current events with accuracy, legitimate sources, and offer you the information needed most to chart new paths for all of us. Kristy, we need to add, we promise to include diverse voices and uplift voices of color in the Optimist Daily in our statements.
I think we do. Yeah.
Yep. Last but not least, guys, it's Monday. It's Memorial Day. Go do something fun. But in the interim, on your way to that fun thing, please consider becoming an emissary on theoptimistdaily.com. And for just $5 a month, support reader-funded independent journalism. Let's keep the Optimist Daily free to all who need it, supported by those who can. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Kristy.
Olivia.
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you so much. It was great being here.